to sort of tie the themes here, Jim came onto my property one day and introduced himself, and he'd been sent over by somebody. He was working with someone that I had been working with a group called Free Arts for Abused Children. That sort of brings artists, creative people in a sort of therapeutic context to connect with kids that are in halfway houses or down at family court, or in these different kids that are caught in the system, from little ones to teenagers. And but he had mentioned that he did stuff on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and one of that was he would take every year he'd take about 10 high-level executives out on a cattle drive at Pine Ridge, and they would spend time with Jim Boo and some people he assembled, and then they would kind of work with the tribe and kind of exchange values. So anyway, Jim was in the diversity training, and one day and other ways of working with organizations, corporations, and municipalities and stuff. He just had a thing for helping people that were working together work better together. And he was describing these value and differences workshops, and I said, wow, that sounds so much more interesting than any script I've looked at in the last few years, because television had really gone through a shift from the 70s, the time of shows that were sort of about stuff, to shows that were about nothing. He said, why don't you work with us? And I said, because I'm not a diversity trainer. He said, well, I've always felt, he was a theater major at Grinnell. He said, most people in the diversity training come out of human resources or a therapeutic background. And I feel like there's more about theater and storytelling dimension, So I would love it for you to come, and you can be a trainer in training, and I just like to bring you into the work. So we did a thing with Northwest Airlines in Boston, and they had one of the issues that was going on. So they had people from the executive offices and people from the stand-up pool and people from the loading dock, and then the ones on the loading dock were the prisoners. Mm-hmm. One of the first things they did was establish who are the vacationers. It's a 2-day off-site workshop. Okay, well, we'll hang out, whatever it is, and eat the donuts, and I don't have to work for 2 days, And who are the proselytizers, or I forget the exact name for that, but the missionaries, the ones who were, we got to have this diversity workshop because we got to straighten out those people. And who are the prisoners? And the prisoners were the ones like the guys from the loading dock. They say, well, we have so many complaints from the women. If you don't do this workshop, we're going to have to fire you. So you got to do this workshop because we got all these complaints we're dealing with. You got to do the value and difference of the workshop. And so it was those energies, and the process of the workshop was wonderful because it really kind of took people to a place of getting everybody in touch with, no matter who you are. Mm-hmm. You are filtering things out, and you're making assumptions about people, and they had a bunch of really neat exercises and process to get everybody in touch with that, and then begin to open things out. But it did happen that some months after that, 5 or 6 months after that, this was eventually a thing on 60 Minutes, but this gal who was, the one in the loading dock that was saying the problems, and part of the problem was another problem that an airline had was anybody shipped a gun through the airport there, the gun somehow did not make it, onto the next flight. Guns were just being pulled off it was like obvious something was going on. She was found in the trunk of her car, So, there were it was like, wow, it was all sort of kumbaya in a certain kind of way and meaningful experience. It was clear that, like maybe these people have this experience, would it last? Mm-hmm. This is what led me to get into LAP, but it helped me to see what that realm was like for corporations, dealing with the human resource aspect of things, and the diversity and the relationships, and how to deal with them or not deal with them in a kind of area where people can get falsely accused too. And it's not a simple thing to figure out because it deals with people's humanity and consciousness and how they treat each other. But I definitely had that experience in that time that we had not been in contact so much. So I could get how you were what you were describing, and I knew that I could.
By the thing because and I've learned a lot about the human resources department since then, because a filmmaker who's doing a bullying in the workplace documentary came and interviewed me, and she taught me a lot about what I was experiencing and what I was saying. This is what my perception is that it's not human resources, it's inhumane resources. I feel like they're taking me in and trying to debrief me in some private room to find out what I have on them. And then they're going to try to turn it around. And I did start learning that this is sort of at the end of the day, the company is protecting the company. If you go in there and you say, this person just did this to me, they're like, she's got A, B, C, D, big guns on us. How's the easiest way out of this for us? And sometimes it's to eliminate the person that's reporting it, and that's what I learned a lot from Beverly Peterson, and she took me back kind of to this time with you too, because she talked to me and included me in on some things of this whole human resource. You think they're there for you, but they're really protecting the company's interest, and at the end of the day they work in an office. So how can they ever relate to what it's like to be locked in a closet with a total stranger? There's really
meaning in the cab of a truck.
In the cab of a truck, because you there's no, when and I spent so much time thinking about it. In fact, in one of the incidences I had in my training, the police had to come, and I had spent 2 days in bed, like trying to think about like what could you compare this to? What other job would you have to work with somebody in a very small space and not be able to get away from them? You can just only take so much of a person in those close quarters. It doesn't matter who they are. And so I asked the police officers that came to the room, because they team them up. I said, how do they team you guys up? Like partners. And they both looked at each other like, you don't even want to know. I said, okay, you don't even need to tell me anymore. But at the end of the day, you get to go home and vent to your wife. And I don't get, we don't do that. We work and we sleep, and everything that's bad and everything that's good, it all goes on in this box, and there's no outlet or anything. There's no thought put into it. There's no rhyme or reason put into it, and they're gunning for you. So they do.
If you can create a team that you drive with this other team player, then you created it. But if you're just stuck in it,
you're kind of stuck in it because you're in training. You can't get another job until you complete the training, because nobody wants to hire, a qualified carrier doesn't want to hire somebody. But at the same time, this is going on the highway. So how comfortable do you feel? You said you were stunned that I was driving an 18-wheeler. How comfortable do you feel now knowing that the truck next to you has got 2 students that can barely drive around the block and are ready to knife each other because they've been at each other's throats every day, and the company's not doing anything to step in? That's when I was like, this is ridiculous, because we're talking about one carrier that's got 3,800 trucks like this out on the road and 2 people in each truck. And in this thing, while I've been doing it, there's actually a case that happened in Buffalo, New York, where one co-driver came out and killed the other co-driver while the guy was driving. With regards to the women, it's very common for the women to get thrown off, especially in the desert. So as my thing was unfolding, I started finding out that this was so common, and it's been so covered up, and I just was like, I gotta say something. I mean, I was staying up at night. Going, I have to say something. All I can say is that I was possessed. I don't know. I was possessed that I had to do something.
It seems to me
driven
because Desiree had worked in hotel business for a time. She knew her being around computers. She knew how things ought to be in a workplace, or could be, and and she had some intelligence and so that she had some kind of skills and experience that a lot of the other women didn't have, or the men who, you know, would have wanted to or would have wanted to if they'd really been able to see what was going on or something. So,
Yeah.
So she started applying those and connecting with stuff that was emerging like Twitter. The emerging part of it, not just understanding computer systems. So
Already a full.
she knew how they were operating within the corporation and whether it might be.
They were using a computer system that I worked on before that has you know, they can take notes on you.
Mm.
So I was able to tell they were keeping notes on me in the system. So when I would I would call up and say I need some more logbooks. They would only ask me, what's your employee number? They were like real polite to me until I told them the employee number, and then my screen came up, and then all the whole way they treated me was different. So I started suspecting they had notes in the computer from the way they were changing their demeanor with me. And it turned out it was a computer application I'd used before, and we did used to keep notes on people in a hotel. You know, so and so, you know, whatever. Watch out for this guy. He pulls this every time. And sometimes they were nasty notes. I'll be perfectly honest. And the way that you're supposed to use that sort of application is have it elevated so that only certain managers can get into certain levels, but they weren't doing that. So you have these people that were hourly people that don't really know anything about privacy, or they were keeping all of these confidential, whatever. So it was making people have a skewed way that they treated me, and I was recognizing as soon as I gave them that employee number, that screen came up, their whole way. So I kind of turned that back around on them and just started using the social media. And it was stressful because I knew they were monitoring me. I was basically a mole living in their truck, airing their dirty laundry on the internet at the same time I was employed by them. And they couldn't stop me because I wasn't breaking the law. I never had an accident or a citation. And they were aware of him. If I was somebody else that didn't have any sort of insulation around me, or anybody, there's just a number of ways that I would have not been able to make it through that time to do it. So it was,
And I would say, you know, the sort of cynical spin would be, I told you earlier, there was one guy she described that had been kind of helpful, kind of sought to do the right thing, a little bit insecure about how he was going to stick his neck out or something. But, you know, but seemed like the best ally.
mm-hmm.
The one who, you know, so as I told you earlier, I called him and thanked him for doing that. And I think that in some ways there was a part of it of, oh, you know, people are watching. There was that. And in some way it might have motivated him, and it might have also made even him have a sense of backup. I certainly wasn't being trying to kind of contrived, or, you know, this is a veiled threat, but I didn't come at it as a threat as much as to really communicate that. But I also knew that I was letting him know that I was really interested, and it was early on time with LAP. I was really getting into what the possibilities were. I didn't know. I mean, I think actually, if something had really happened to you, you know, I mean, if they'd really tried to do something, you know, anyway, or somebody had, you know, then that's the kind of thing. Well, now that puts that story right out. And
Mm-hmm.
the story, you know.
Yeah,
So,
because there's a lot of people that
carrot and stick kind of motivation.
I hear a lot of people make, you know, when in that environment, they make a lot of threats. Well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this. I never did any of that. I never threatened and said, well, I'm going to sue you, or
No.
I'm going to blah, 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 blah. The few times that I did, when it was starting to get to where I was starting to build an influence on Twitter, there was a couple of times that I went in and I said, you know, this is getting, people are reading this, you know, more than just him. And they didn't seem to really take it too seriously. Once he made the phone call, and that guy didn't end up staying around because he had his own issues, but he did communicate it to enough people in upper levels to let them know it's not going to be as simple as just eliminating her, because she has the ability to tell this story further out. And so that was like their own guilt, as far as that's how I felt about it. And then he made the phone call to the women's trucking organization, and they were less receptive.
Yeah. This was a group that was, you know, wanting to be the sort of the airline flight magazine of women in trucking, you know. So they really wanted it to be a, you know, a bright, happy kind of story. Their sponsors, they had kind of a business plan of creating that audience,
good
and that
housekeeping
venue,
stamp of approval,
you know,
that
all American.
you know. So they didn't really like it that Des was kind of calling things for what they were, you know, both the good and the bad, and in a way that people were responding to, you know, resonating and being encouraged by.
they were in, and I think that was what kept spurring me on, is that when people would go, thank you for doing this, and people would call me and tell me something, they didn't want to say it themselves. And I know how that is. I know how women are. They always want to make it seem like everything's perfect on the outside, even though everything is a shambles inside. And I've lived like that, and I know a lot of women like that, and they just have this totally different facade when you see them out in public, and then I just wanted to shake that off of my life. And it's such a burden. It had been such a burden for me to live where everything was how it looked on the exterior. Aren't we so happy? Aren't we, you know, it's just very stressful. So to have these women, when they were calling me up privately and saying, you know, about this thing and whatever happened, they felt it, hindsight's 20/20, so they always start blaming themselves, and I should have done this and I should have done that, and I was so dumb that I did this, and now I realize that you just start beating yourself up. But then to have this women's trucking organization beating you up, like just kicking you, I mean, I was just thinking of that scene from The Elephant Man where he's like, you know, getting kicked in that last scene by these people, and that's how I felt with these women at this trucking organization. It's like, I'm coming to you for help. That this stuff really happened, and I want to make sure that other women don't experience this, and for them to just like rabid, just you can't say that, you're gonna scare people away. Blah, blah, blah. I was astounded by it, and he wasn't the only man that read it. There were a couple other men that read it, and some of them would make comments like, it's amazing that in this day and age women react like this. And they've really been the hardest hurdle, is these kind of groups. It's like, we need to make everything seem like it's perfect. And so that was kind of the funniest thing, because it is a male-dominated industry. But the men are actually, I think, from what I've experienced all this, they're more open to the women than the women want to give credit for. The women sometimes, some of these older industry women, they kind of approach it like, we're lucky to be here, let's not rock the boat. You know, and that it's different when you're out on the road. That's not the kind of support that you need to give somebody that's coming to you that's had a trauma. You don't want to. I think it's irresponsible, and I've equated it to this. It's kind of like going and reporting that you got molested by the priest to the nun, and the nun tells you, "Don't you ever tell anybody that." And that was what I was experiencing. You know, these women were trying to cover up for these few bad apples because they didn't want to sully the reputation of give a black eye. And that just infuriated
They get
me.
marginalized themselves.
Yeah.
As unhappy women or just false fellowship.
Yeah.
You know, They
Yeah.
didn't want to get marginalized in the same way that they were marginalizing the
Right. And I just thought it was really like, how far back are we going? What is this? You know, like the 1950s? I mean, you know, we need to start talking about some of this stuff because it's just very irresponsible to some of the remarks that were said we're honoring the women who've served in silence. I was like, what? That I mean, they actually wrote that, served in silence. So it wasn't that it was news to them. It's that they expected you to never talk about the things that you experienced, even if they were terrible things. And
Somehow that would hurt the cause of women in trouble.
right. That frightened me just to know how powerful.
Dug in that power threat.
Huh?
How dug in that power.
Yeah,
full,
because they're at the
threat.
same time they're
Dug in.
eager to lure women in. So that at that time they were launching this media
In the
campaign.
name of protecting, probably.
Right, you know, we want women are, you know, I think a lot of it is, a lot of these industries are sort of under the microscope, like why haven't you diversified? You know, why don't you have more women? So even Ray LaHood, who's the transportation secretary, he's like, in Obama, they have this women and girls initiative to increase women to come into the transportation industry. That's a very broad industry.